To say that I am thrilled about the panel that we've been able to gather is a massive understatement. We have the great fortune to bring together a spectrum of perspectives that really reflects everything from the psychology of human relationships, brand activism at its best, change making and advocacy at an industry level, and then of course the power of creativity. So the intention here is really to bring to life the learning that you have just seen, and really to demonstrate the critical role that trust plays in relationships today, but also the complexity of building that trust, right? That magic that Richard just spoke about in terms of that intersection of the me, the we, the say, and the do. So I'd love to start by kicking it off with one of the most beloved and bold brands, a brand that lives in a category that actually quite simply brings us everyday joy, but yet at the same time has managed to take on and fight some pretty lofty fights. So I'm pleased to introduce Matthew McCarthy, the CEO of Ben & Jerry's. So Matthew, I'd love to start with you in terms of, we know that right now is a time when brands are needed to sort of step up and do more than they ever have. And there's a real need for urgency in that. So I'd love to hear from you. What are some of the new imperatives that you're seeing and that you're championing as a kind of way forward?
Thanks, Megan. And thank you, Richard and team, for including me in this. These are always extremely important moments, and to see the work that you're all doing is something that really helps me and helps the business. Listen, we're facing pandemics on pandemics, right? I don't need to tell anybody that. The most important thing that we can do, that I can do, is start with compassion and taking care of our people. Never before did I actually fully, I think, get the gravity of the concept that compassion is a business imperative. It's not those goofy posters you might see on a wall in your office, like teamwork or whatever else. But this idea, if I'm not taking care of my people, if people are not taking care of each other, we're not going to be making a whole lot of ice cream. And in fact, this is always true. And sometimes it takes a crisis to highlight that. I think the other thing I'd say is that values, everything comes from values. And if you think about it, brands have always been in the trust business. A brand is a repository of meaning and trust. A brand it represents the semiotics of what your product is, what your service does, and all the people behind it. And one of the things that I'm finding, that we're finding, is that these crises we're facing are piercing perhaps the false veil between our humanity and our business reality. All businesses are about people. Every single business has people behind it, making the product, leading the business, doing the sales, whatever it might be. And the values of the people are reflected in the day-to-day actions of our business. The actions of our business is our source of authenticity. So it's very, if A equals B and B equals C, if you're not clear about your values, it's going to be really hard to then try to, through the mechanics of your business, make your authenticity clear to the people that you're trying very hard to serve, particularly in a crisis.
I love that. And, it was interesting because when we chatted, I want to talk a little bit about how some of that's manifesting with some of the behaviors at Ben & Jerry, but I'd love to also hear from you, because when we spoke, you said the one thing you don't want to do is go up there and just talk about how great Ben & Jerry's is. You actually want to acknowledge that there is still work to be done. And so I would love to hear from you in terms of what are some of the behaviors, but also where is there work to be done? Maybe not only within your organization, but across the industry.
We're fortunate. I am fortunate that I have the privilege of being part of an organization whose values were set quite clearly by Jerry and Ben 42 years ago. They're in everything we do. That being said, I've worked on many businesses and brands over the years that perhaps didn't have that in their DNA. That's not an excuse. And I think it would be a real miscarriage of responsibility for me or any business leader to somehow delegate, well, yeah, that company, yeah, but what about type of a thing? We all have that responsibility. And frankly, the people that we serve, both our employees, our entire supplier value network, and our consumers are demanding it now more than ever. And so I think at Ben & Jerry's, I find it a hell of a lot more helpful as a white male of privilege who spent most of his life actually not understanding the concept of the privilege that I had. I don't have the lived experience other than of a white male of privilege. And so what I try to do is to connect with other business leaders to show them, to your point, not how great we are, yeah, but where our shortcomings are. For example, we were founded in the second whitest state in the United States. We are a very white company. I'm white. We've got lots of white people leading this business. Why is it that way? And so we've been doing a lot of work over the past 18 months to actually get outside help, experts in structural racism, which is a little scary topic. I mean, the first time someone said to me these terms, white supremacy culture or structural racism, immediately I had my defense mechanism. Wait a minute, I'm not a racist, all that stuff. But the reality is structural racism is everywhere. So we're going through the process of root cause analysis now. We've got many, many employees across our business, both here and we're in over 30 countries, engaged in the process of helping us understand the root cause analysis of what we need to do to make Ben & Jerry's internally and through our business systems truly a place of equity. The process we're following is very much results-based accountability. So most of the work we're doing is not just kind of soul searching and hugging and all that stuff, which is very important to connect with yourself personally around some of these topics. But it's about, as a business, as a team, what are the results that we are going to set for ourselves in terms of leveraging the power of our business to drive change.
Amazing. I mean, I think obviously this is such a journey of honesty. You're tapping into, identity conversations, deep rooted. So I'm actually going to shift gears a little bit because we also have Esther Perel, who is psychotherapist, New York Times bestselling author of The State of Affairs, and just a guru on human relationships. So Esther, we talked about and learned about in the actual data, sort of how people are expecting more from brands today. And obviously Matthew just spoke about kind of that, the new imperatives. And there's an opportunity and a need for brands to fill voids, to play various roles. And I'm curious to hear from you in terms of how does that mirror personal human relationships? How does that sort of reflect some of the evolution that you've been seeing? I think we have Esther.
Esther forgot to unmute herself.
No worries. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you for including me. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a very interesting thing to hear a description that puts trust at the center of the relationship with the brand. Trust is at the center of the relationship with the therapist. Between what I say and what I do. Between how I look out for your well-being, but not at the cost of all your relationships with other people. How I understand your place in society and don't put expectations on you that are completely not realistic because of who you are, what your means are, etc. But as I was listening to Richard, something really struck me. That is, I think, one of the understandings of why this trusting the brand is becoming so fundamental. We talk about living with two shock systems, the pandemic and structural inequality. But what we also need to understand is that the system that used to organize what we do with what we don't understand, how we bear our suffering, and how we deal with evil used to be called religion. And that secularized world in which we live has left a void that were the three main tasks of our religious lives and our communal structures. And who is going to take care of that? And that is the void that I think the brands are replacing, almost like the new saints. When we live with this enormous sense of prolonged uncertainty, when we live with this sense of unknown at this moment, when we live with the sense that there's been such massive amount of individualism that says you're in charge, you can choose, the burdens of the self are all on you, but suddenly you realize that you can't do much alone, and especially when you're interdependent as we are right now, then trust becomes a force that enables us to cope with all that uncertainty and all that vulnerability. The parallel between human relationships and brands is that never have we put more expectations on our relationships, and especially on our romantic relationships, like we have never had such unprecedented expectations from a brand. We want the brand to solve the problems of society. We want the brand to have meaningful actions that allow me to identify with it so that I feel that the brand sees me. The same as we want a partner to see me. It's called intimacy. And intimacy is called into-me-see.
Can I just jump in here, Megan?
Yeah.
And Esther, we were on a call yesterday and we were talking about, being transactional versus building a relationship. And, you could argue that over the last, before the pandemic and before the, what's going on in the world now, brands were becoming more transactional, because there's so much pressure on sales and not really focused on relationships. And you had such a great point of view on the importance of relationship versus just being transactional. And I'd love for you to share that today.
I mean, one thing you said yesterday that got that going was, it's not because I buy something from you that I have a relationship with you. A relationship is first and foremost based on expectations. And these expectations come with boundaries. And the boundaries and the expectations give the parameter to my experience of trust. Trust meaning, is it a process trust? That's always a question that we have, or is it a state, Trust involves beliefs, attitudes. It's a word, by the way, that has one of the most conceptual vagueness that you can find. The same as motivation and vulnerability. Entire fields, from psychology to philosophy to economics, are trying to define those terms and have not come up with really, reliable definitions. But we know when we have it. And more importantly, we know when it has been shattered. We know until recently in the transaction, I presumed that we had a relationship because we bought from me. And the only time people began to talk about trust is when the trust was broken, when there was a betrayal, when there was a company that was lying to me repeatedly, not owning its, taking accountability and ownership for the mistakes and letting me basically fail or buy defunct products and basically telling me, you don't matter. My interests come first. That is the definition of betrayal and of a breach of trust. So it went in the opposite direction, actually.
Yes. And we also spoke, and what was interesting, the data showed that the importance of trust in younger people and younger audiences is even higher.
Yes.
What have you seen? I know you again sort of saw some similar parallels in terms of your research.
I think that the prime reason why for the young person, this trust factor is becoming so significant is simply that all the traditional authorities that used to tell you what to believe, what is expected from you, what's the right thing to do, who you should be, are no longer. You don't necessarily turn to your parents or to your community. Often you don't have a community. The community is the people you work with, and those change every 16 months. I mean, so who is going to tell me where truth lies? What does mean truth today? And in the name of that uncertainty and that massive amount of choice and that crippling uncertainty that comes with it, with the FOMO and the fact that, which one is it going to be? That's where trust becomes so relevant. It's not like I look next to me and there is somebody who's been doing this thing or buying this thing for umpteen years and this is the one. Just don't even think about it. I'm telling you, and you follow me because you copy the previous generations. We don't copy the previous generations in the same way that you have challenger brands who don't copy the iconic brands. Everything was about disruption. Everything was about hacking. And there was an obsession with innovation. And yet, relationships need both innovation and change and stability and security. You constantly straddle these paradoxes. It needs transparency, but it also needs mystery. And that's why for the young person today, this kind of trust on the brand is replacing the lack of the traditional structures that will guide me.
Yeah.
If I could build on that briefly, I'd love to. That's a really powerful point, Esther, that you're making. The other thing that we're seeing in the data, and I think it's kind of like a brick to the forehead, is that badge value in brands is a very outmoded idea. Young people today are constructing their identity in ways that may be different than folks who are a little bit older. and badge value of brands has been pierced by the authenticity and trust. So to Esther's point, this idea of, wait a minute, I'm going to wear those shoes, I'm going to drink that soda, I'm going to buy that ice cream. Hold on a second here. How I define my identity as a person, I own that, not the brand. And I'm not just going to be in a transactional mode with a whole bunch of brands that I choose to spend my hard-earned money on when I don't even know what the hell they stand for. So this idea of that you can just kind of trade in outdated tropes about what your brand stands for in imagery. This is true for all categories, whether it's ice cream or you're talking about the most luxury products. You know, get ready for a big change there on how your brand connects with how people want to construct their own identity.
I love that. I love that. And I do want to talk about this at now a category and an industry level, because I think some of these, you know, this combination of innovation and stability, this idea of identity, you know, understanding where the truth lies, these are really, really interesting themes. And I want to take a step back and look at this through the lens of a category that has actually seen a lot of these things, a lot of disruption, a lot of innovation. So we want to look a little bit at the global wellness category, a category that has seen incredible growth. According to the Global Wellness Institute, the global wellness economy was valued at 4.5 trillion, and that was back in 2018. It's, you know, defined as a number of different subsectors. So you have everything from, you know, personal beauty, nutrition, preventative medicine, lifestyle wellness. There's a whole host of sort of categories that live within wellness. And like I said, it's got lots of innovation and lots of disruption, but there's also lots of work to be done. And so we have Sarah Greenidge. She's the founder of WellSpoken, and she's really helping lead the sort of charge and the change across that industry. So Sarah, I'd love to hear from you in terms of what are some of those issues that you're seeing across the wellness industry that needs to be reimagined, that needs to sort of infuse some of kind of these themes that we just spoke about.
Yeah, sure. And thank you for having me with your esteemed guest. I think, look, the thing is with the wellness industry is, like Matthew said, we are unfortunately living in a white supremacy structure in terms of society. And unfortunately, the wellness sector is not, you know, avoiding that fact. And when we look at the wellness industry and the work that we're trying to do is tackle misinformation. And misinformation can be inaccuracy, but it also can be incomplete information without taking the full picture on board. And there's two kind of key issues I see within the wellness industry. One is that at the moment it has been very white-centered. There's a lot of reasons why that has been. I always kind of talk about the wellness industry as the more hip, rebellious little sister of health. And actually we see in healthcare, there are some real racial inequalities there that we have kind of absorbed by osmosis. And you kind of see a very particular consumer as the target. You see that in the advertising and the PR and the marketing, but also that is who is spoken to. And, you know, often because, you know, the kind of very white, thin, I'll use for example, aesthetic, is kind of heralded as the epitome of wellness. What happens is there's this constant chase and this constant push of messaging around this is what wellness looks like. So we have that, which evidently doesn't breed a lot of diversity in the field, and it also doesn't breed a lot of inclusion because evidently you're not fitting a certain look. And I think the second one, which to me is the most vital, is there's a real lack, even if you take a step out of the wellness industry for a second, globally, around health literacy levels. Within the US and the UK, actually there's a global trend that health literacy is very, very low. And the way that WHO defines that is the ability to understand information and then convert that into an informed decision. And if you look at why some of the reasons health literacy is low, actually there is, for certain groups, Black and minority groups, health inequalities is one of the drivers to why health literacy is super low. And so if you have wellness brands playing into this field, which is one, you know, heralding and propping up a kind of an elite whiteness when it comes to what health and wellness looks like. And then you have people who can't access that health and wellness through low health literacy and also the big pay gap that we still see between minorities. What you then have is wellness actually adding widening the chasm of health inequality in the world, as opposed to, you know, closing that gap, which when you talk to a lot of brands, and we have a lot of CEOs and big visionaries of how to make the world healthier. Actually, when you kind of drill down to it, if you are not aware of some of these systems at play and how your brand plays into that, and how your brand, like Matthew said, you know, it has some of those structures embedded just because of the society that we live in, and you don't start to dismantle them. I think wellness is a great example, because we can have direct links to health outcomes when we do it right. And so I think there is such an opportunity here to, you know, move the needle in the industry in terms of driving better health literacy and decentering whiteness.
And let's talk a little bit about some of the solutions, because you actually have put forth and are championing a charter for the industry. Can you speak a little bit about some of the details around that?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, one of the things that when you're kind of looking at the wellness industry as a whole, there's a couple of problems that I kind of see in terms of tackling racial inequality in the scene. So we have, you know, a lot of kind of optical allyship. We definitely saw over the last couple of weeks brands really you know, going for it when it comes to showing their solidarity, but not necessarily, we don't know what the work is going on behind the scenes. We also have a lot of virtue signaling, and we also, you know, see a lot of kind of a savior complex coming through with it, specifically within the wellness field. The reason I say that is I've seen some great initiatives put forward by different brands on what they're doing to tackle, you know, racial inequality within their organizations, and then what they're going to do, you know, externally to drive change. But this is the thing, this is not an issue where you as a brand can be a lone wolf. And one of the things that I'm really passionate about is industries change. And what that means is that we need to all be working towards the very same goals into getting to our destination. And so we've launched this diversity charter that we are actively calling wellness brands, whatever sector they work in within that umbrella, to sign up to. And we've got 5 key areas, and I'll whip through them. One of them is education. So if you're a health and wellness brand, for us, it's super important that you understand how health literacy plays in, and actually how race has a role in making groups be not included in this conversation. Corporate diversity, we've heard lots of people talk about that today, you know, about driving diversity and inclusion within organizations themselves, and also representation. So moving away from tokenism, you know, the random black person that appears on a feed on Instagram, and the rest of the scroll is nothing to do with that, and people can see right through that, and that doesn't build any trust. And for me, the 4th one is the kicker, and that is access. So one of the things that we know, you know, from the stats is that Black and minority groups make up some of the lowest income quintiles in the UK and globally across the world. And what happens then is you can do all those top 3, but if your services and products are completely alienated to people that can't access it, actually it doesn't have the impact that we want. So we need to look at ways of how we can make health and wellness products and services accessible and fair pay, making sure that people are paid equitably in the scene. And unfortunately, that's something that doesn't happen. So we are trying to actively make everybody work towards those 5 goals, and hopefully that's what shifts the needle.
Thank you so much. And it's really, I mean, education, accessibility, that representation, reflection of diversity. I mean, these were all topics that came through in our learning as well. So clearly, you know, an agenda that is spot on in terms of driving that change. So I want to talk now about the role of creativity. I mean, as Richard mentioned, we are kind of in the backdrop of Cannes Lion Live, although we're not there. So it is a time where creativity, where innovation is not only celebrated, sometimes it's even challenged and redefined. So having Judy John, our Global Chief Creative Officer here, to join us is amazing. I'd love to hear from you, Judy, just in terms of what do you see as the role and responsibility of brands leveraging and using and tapping into the power of creativity to achieve all the things that we've been speaking about?
Yeah, for sure. And you know, we saw today that people need and are expecting help more than ever. And they're relying on brands and businesses to step in and help the me and the we part. And it's also not just the say, but also to act. And those are the big trends that really we saw come out of the survey. And creativity is not just an output. I want, you know, everyone to think about creativity bigger than that, because creativity is how we solve problems, solve business problems, when we come together and use our collective creativity to figure out how we're going to do it differently. It's, you know, creativity is the storytelling, it's the emotion and the connection. It's how we make people care and share. And those are the really important pillars of creativity, I think. And creativity has the power to create change when we all come together. And, you know, I wanted to talk a little bit about, I'm really proud of the work that we just created for Dove Men Plus Care over the weekend. And this is a brand that advocates for fatherhood. And for Father's Day this year, you know, when the world changed, we pivoted an entire communications plan in 10 days to honor Black fathers who have been lost to violence and racism, and to support their families. And, you know, it was really hard to do, but we came together collectively with the client because it was the right thing to do. And this is a type of say and action that we need to do more of. And so it's on all of us to do the right thing. And right now, the right thing for people in society is also the right thing for brands and companies. They are not mutually exclusive. You know, when we look at short-term sales and long-term reputation, those things come together in trust. And, you know, change requires all of us.
Thank you very much. Absolutely. And I think that example of the work is so representative of everything that we've spoken about, and the need for that sort of bravery and boldness and embracing, you know, the need for change. So I want to ask Matthew one of your favorite questions that I know you often get, but if I'm sitting in the audience right now, I'd say, okay, Ben and Jerry's, but they have the ability to do this. They've been doing it for so long. You know, do other brands have the permission to get involved and to do something?
Yeah, I get asked this question a lot. It kind of blows me away. Like, aren't you afraid of pissing off your customers? You know, that whole, you just got to throw that whole thing out. Right? I mean, if you just, and I encourage other leaders to let go of that outdated narrative that businesses shouldn't lead with their values. Actually, businesses have been leading with their values for many, many decades. It's called lobbying. Businesses do lots of stuff behind the scenes. So we're actually quite good as business people and kind of having values and driving them. The opportunity now is to broaden that space to allow all of our human values, the things that really drive us as people, into the business, and to take action. And I think it's often the shortest distance between where you are and where you want to go, I've found, is a good wipeout. And how you handle a screw up or a faux pas, or if I stick my foot in my mouth, I don't want to say stupid stuff. I don't want to look like a moron. I don't want to look like I don't know what I'm doing. But the reality is things are moving so fast that if you pretend you know everything, nobody ever, to Sarah's point, everybody sees right through that. We all know that not all of us have the answers. And in fact, being willing to say, I don't know, but I'm committed, that's really powerful to people around you. I'm not sure what to do as a white guy, particularly when it comes to all the topics related to racial equity. But I do know that if I wait until I feel that I'm an expert, I will have squandered the opportunity as a leader to take action. And so, yeah, I mean, no human wants to look like an idiot. Let's just kind of call it out. But the reality is, if you've got the privilege of leading a business, a team of one, a team of 1 million, you have to act. And in fact, the decision not to act is a very powerful decision. The decision to wait is a very powerful decision. And you own the impact of those decisions, whether you like it or not. And so I often say, I really not sure what to do, but here's my intention. Here are my values. Here's what I'm concerned about. And most importantly, a bit to the creativity conversation with Judy, here's the opportunity that we want to seize. A lot of the conversation is framed in a negative light. That's appropriate. We have a global pandemic. We have a massive rise of populism. We have a tremendous and widening chasm between the haves and the have-nots. At the same time, business must be part of the solutions. Most people in the world work for a business. They're connected to some type of commerce. And so business must be in the game. And so if you're not, and you're waiting, you just have to own the fact that you're choosing to not, choosing to wait.
That's so inspiring. And what I want to say is overcoming fear is probably the biggest barrier we have right now. Like, there will always be people that don't agree with what you say or what you do, but you have to live your purpose. You have to have the strength of your convictions, because everything has risk attached to it. And now more than ever, sitting on the sidelines has risk. Not doing anything has risk. And you can mitigate that by being authentic, as Matthew said, you know, bringing in other voices from the community, but, you know, not doing anything is not an option right now.
Yeah. And living your values means committing to sort of being part of the solution. And as we again learned, being part of the solution has to sort of start with getting your house in order too. So I know, Esther, you have a new podcast that is called How's Work, and it explores the relationship dynamics within the workplace. So I'd be just, again, curious to sort of, based on the conversation we were just having, you know, how do we think about fostering, building trusted relationships inside in order to kind of manifest those values externally? I think you're on mute again.
Okay, sorry. I think it goes a little bit what Sarah and Matthew actually have been saying. You know, we all come to work with a resume. It's a CV of what you've done, but we all also come to work with an unofficial resume, which is our relationship history. And our relationship history is all the messages that we receive, explicit and implicit, about our relationship with the others. And, you know, if it happens in society, the vehicle that transmits the values of a society is primarily our family, or what we call family. So we come with a legacy. And one of the primary legacies that we are challenging at this moment is if you were raised for autonomy, or if you were primarily raised for loyalty and interdependence. Were you raised for self-reliance? That will tell you a lot about who you are, how you work, what you expect from others, how you deal with help, how you show your vulnerability, etc. Or were you raised for interdependence? What happened with the pandemic and with structural inequality is it just puts the interdependence front and center. You know, wellness has also been called self-care. That is a problem. The problem is that we have focused on self-care instead of understanding that the self is never separated from the we, you know, and that it is how I care for others and how others care for me that is going to help me care for myself. This is the fundamental structure that I think is being broken, and where the trust comes in, because well, that's the first thing. And the second link to that, also to something that Matthew was saying, which I explore a lot in How Is Work. It's really about not so much talking about the work and the future of work, but talking about the relationships between the people who show up at work. What they say, what they don't say, what they imply, what they just a little cringe in their face, you know, that gives away an entire story. It's also the creativity that Judy is talking about, which in other words, I call aliveness. You can survive, but that's not the same as being alive. And that's where the creativity comes in. It's that energetic force. In both cases, relationships and work, which is really why I went from where should we begin to how is work. There are two things that are essential: the unprecedented expectations people bring to relationships, but also the way that the world of business has brought in the language of emotion like it never has before. We are talking about psychological safety in the same breath that we're talking about performance indicators. We're talking about vulnerability, transparency, trust. Never was the emotional vocabulary so central to the business. It used to be called soft skills, and soft skills used to be called feminine skills, and feminine skills were idealized in principle and disregarded in reality. This is what's happening, you know. And we brought marketing economics to our dating life, but we brought emotional life to our business life.
I love that.
This is where How Is Work is literally sitting on that crux.
Yeah. Absolutely. And trust obviously is a massive nexus to all of that. I could keep going on here, and there are so many questions. There is such richness. I just realized that we have 2 minutes left. So I think what I'm going to do is I'd love to just kind of end with some of these like just nuggets that I've been jotting down. I mean, there was such richness in this conversation, but the ideas of, you know, brands repositioning around meaning and trust, all business is about people, what you just spoke about in terms of the world of business and our emotional vocabulary kind of merging together. This idea of who tells me where the truth lies and an opportunity for brands to step in, the balance of innovation and change with stability. There's just so many things, the need to kind of advocate and collaborate to create industry-wide change with kind of a clear charter and a clear set of requirements and actions. So there's such richness. Thank you so much for joining us today. I can't thank the full audience enough for participating and joining as well. A couple things that I just wanted to say in closing is we've got great things coming. We want to continue this conversation around trusted brands in 2020. Richard made mention of some of the tools and some of the thinking that we have that's on the horizon. So we look really, really forward to working with you all, working with your brands to really bring this learning to life and to really unlock kind of that necessity of what trust means.